Hello, hello. Hi, everybody. This is Hyperwave. I'm Leah Wald here with Tyler Jenks, who is somewhere mysterious that he may tell us about. We just can't seem to bounce, right? All of them, anywhere you look at it, we're below the trend line. We have 24 hours to get back up 250 points. And even if we do that, it's really not all that impressive because we are struggling, right? So that's kind of why my tweet was a little ominous. So I'll be honest on that one. Tyler, where are you, man?
Well, I'm actually up in Hyde Park, New York, which, if you have not had the chance to visit it, is absolutely beautiful. It's right on the Hudson River. We just took a 2.5 mile walk across the river on the longest walking bridge across any river in the world. And the views are spectacular. As most of you may know, the Culinary Institute of America is up here, and they've got 5 different restaurants with students preparing spectacular food, world renowned. A lot of the most famous chefs in the world have come out of the Institute. So I'm relaxed, having a great time, except for one thing, which
Bitcoin?
Bitcoin.
All right. Well, I think everybody's freaking out. So, Tyler, what's Hyperwave saying about what's going on right now?
Well, let's take a look and we'll all look together. I'll do a quick screen share. And what we will look at the current situation with Hyperwave. And let's do it this way and bring it up. This is Bitstamp. Up to the moment, we're at 78.96, which is actually good news because we were down below not too long ago. We had dropped all the way down to 76.82. So we've come up $200 on this candle. As you all know that have watched this show, this candle is a weekly candle, and it will end at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tomorrow. And what you are looking at are 2 lines. This is the Bitcoin price going all the way back to less than $500, all the way up to almost 20,000. A drop here to below 6,000. A rise up here to got all the way up to almost 12,000, 11,750, and now we have slipped back and we are trading at 7,881. I just took you on a quick journey of price that goes back a good year and a half. Notice on these 2 lines, this is what I call the phase 3 trend line of Hyperwave. And those of you that have watched this before know that this is what a hyperwave looks like. It has a flat phase 1, 3 accelerated phases, 2, 3, and 4. A drop into phase 5, a recovery in phase 6, and a long drop all the way back to below the beginning. All hyperwaves have this in common. We've looked at hundreds and hundreds of them over the last 150 years. The one we are in now is simply another hyperwave. However, this one is unusual because it is so large in terms of the price movement over a short period of time, larger than any of the others I've ever studied. It's unusual in that it's a brand new asset class. All the others I've ever studied are assets that have been around in some cases for thousands of years, like gold and silver, some cases of hundreds of years, like US stocks on the stock market, commodities that have been around for thousands of years, like sugar and cocoa and coffee. This one's only been around 10 years. And in that short period of time, it's already exemplified not only the basic form of a hyperwave, but it's done it in a much larger way in a much shorter period of time than any of the others I've studied. And because of that, I've been not ready to jump quickly on drawing conclusions about it. I keep showing examples of hyperwaves that I called funky hyperwaves that do things a little bit different than all of the other ones. And I don't know at this point, although we might know tomorrow, if this is a normal hyperwave or a funky one in some way. I gave you some very specific ideas about that by looking at the Dow Jones Industrial Average from 1982 all the way to the present. And one thing we noticed there was in 1983, 4, 5, 6, and 7, the Dow Jones Industrial did this same sort of thing and dropped down after the crash of October the 19th of 1987, where it dropped 22% in a single day. What happened after that is it did not go back all the way down to a phase 2 or a phase 1. It continued on up after 1987, 88, 89, and 90, and then began an enormous move, the largest in stock market history, following this action in 1987. So I've been holding out the possibility to you that even if we come down and break this phase 3 line, we cannot conclude from that this particular hyperwave is over. What we can conclude is if this line, and I'll make it larger so we know exactly what we're talking about, that started last Sunday at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time and ends tomorrow at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, if the close of that candle, doesn't matter what it does during the week, but if the close tomorrow night at 8 o'clock is below this line, which is at 8,096 this week, 8096 is the hyperwave line ending tomorrow night. It will then go up by approximately 150 points the following week in terms of the line. But if we close below 8,096 tomorrow night, this line is invalidated and we should drop quickly down to the phase 2 line, which is this lower line. Going back to the chart very briefly, this is the phase 1 line, the phase 2 line, and the phase 3 line. In real time, the phase 1 line is off the chart to the left, but it comes in at around $1,000. Phase 2 started somewhat below $1,000 and started moving up at this angle and therefore validating this line. Phase 3 began here, and we've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 touches approximately of that line, going all the way back to the summer of last year. Now, as I said, this is critical because I tweeted today saying the great thing about hyperwave is it's definitive. Yes, there are different interpretations of where the phase line should be drawn until you get enough data to do that. But once they are drawn and validated, like this phase 3 line has been on 10 occasions, including this very important candle that occurred back on February the 4th of this year, when we dropped hundreds of points below the phase 3 line, but closed on that Sunday well above it and has been above it for 5 weeks. To me, that validated this line as being very precise. So tomorrow at 8 o'clock, if we're below 8,096, this line loses its validity, and the next line of support is right here, which is coming in slightly below 4,000. I've got it at about 3,891. And we could get from here at 8,000 to there very quickly, meaning in 1 day, probably within a week. It will be a dramatic drop if we close tomorrow below 8,096. Okay, because it's such a definitive tool, and you can't shade the results. You have to be very precise on the way you draw your lines and interpret it. So we've got the same thing on Bitstamp. We were looking at Bitfinex, and you'll see that they're almost identical charts. Both of them are trading right now below the phase 3 line. On Bitstamp, at this moment, we're at 78.69. On Bitfinex, we're at 78.46. That's about as close as I've seen those two indicators, two exchanges, in terms of sharing prices in some time. We had one of our followers, Lucas, give us another thing to look at. Because each exchange has its own Bitcoin prices, until this liquid index is up and they've worked out all the bugs, the only way we can get a precision is by doing it exchange by exchange. And it's possible that we would get different results on Hyperwave depending on what exchange we were looking at. So once again, I want to thank Lucas in public for noticing that the Brave New Coin Liquid Index, which is basically 11 different exchanges that can be followed on TradingView, when charted, looks identical to what we just saw on Bitstamp and Bitfinex. And the pricing also shows that the line is coming in somewhere around the 8,100 level, and we are below that. So a conglomeration of 11 different exchanges shows the same starting dates in terms of the phase 3 line, same starting dates in terms of the phase 2 line, and basically all of the data points are consistent with what we've just looked at. So I wanted to take a little more time today answering Leah's question about what is Hyperwave actually saying. And I don't think I could be more explicit than I just was. It's a very definitive call. Do I think it is going to bounce back up as it continues to do off this line before tomorrow night? Yes, I do. And I don't say that just out of hope. I say it because this tends to be a remarkably resilient line. And we are now only 190 points below it. And we'll just have to wait and see. You have to be patient. You can try to guess what's going to happen, but it does not make sense to me as an investor to go with incomplete information. And we have incomplete information, even though it seems a bit dire at this point. I wanted to show you two other charts that you have seen before.
Tyler.
Yes, please.
Similar to what you were about to talk about, there's a great question. Oh, it sounds like there's reverb. Guys, just let me know. What past hyperwave examples have faced headwinds that Bitcoin is currently facing?
Well, if that question means fundamental headwinds, they all do. Every hyperwave does. That's why it ends up going all the way back to where it began. One of the most important things that I've been trying to get across about hyperwaves is how special they are. They are very, very rare. And when one comes up, it's because it is challenging the consensus view of the world about that particular asset or asset class that is going into a hyperwave. Hyperwaves are pointing out deficiencies in the knowledge of some major macroeconomic force. This particular one, to me and many of the maximalists, is pointing out the problem with fiat currency in the banking system. Now, if you assume that that is possibly true, you can imagine what the headwinds are. If you are challenging a system that has been in place for generations and centuries, the blowback is going to be enormous. And it's coming from not only within the Bitcoin community, parasitically eating itself by trying to slow down or destroy Bitcoin, but it's certainly beginning to come from outside the community. Everybody knows about the quotes from the chairman of Chase, that this is a fraud, and the heads of governments around the world, that this is a Ponzi scheme, and by whole countries attempting to ban or slow down or stop the movement. Those are all enormous headwinds, but I could point out the same headwinds for every other hyperwave I've ever seen. Not specifically the same, but with the same intensity. And what happens is that's why it takes so long to go from a phase 1 to a phase 2. And when you're finally in a phase 2 and beginning to move, it gets easier to go into a phase 3 that starts going up very sharply as more and more people adopt the understanding of what this thing stands for. Unfortunately, when you go into a phase 4, the price gets way ahead of itself and goes further than it should. And then that causes the blowback in terms of 4, 5, and 6. So specifically on this Bitcoin chart and on this Bitcoin diagram, hyperwave diagram, when you're talking about headwinds, they're always going to come from this side over. It's what builds a wave. As a wave comes into a beach, you get into shallower and shallower ground, and you've got the winds building the wave higher and higher. All waves break. The biggest waves ever recorded in the oceans are right around 100 feet. Theoretically, I've read studies that show they could get up to 120 feet, but not 200 or 500 or 1,000. Everything has a limit, including
Tyler.
Hyperwaves. Yes.
So while we have this chart up, since we broke below the phase 3 line, can you talk about where you think potentially we are right now? Well, and what that means for Hyperwave?
On this chart, we have been moving up phase 3, and we are slightly below it as of this moment. If we close above 8,096, we'll be back above it, and we will be setting up to go into a phase 4, which is I believe what we are doing. This phase 3 drawn on this diagram looks a lot sharper than the one on the chart we just looked at, which leads me to believe, as I have stated over and over, that even if phase 3 fails, I believe phase 2 will hold the price somewhere around the 4,000 level. And from that, I believe we can build back up again into what is the real phase 3. This one will disappear if it is broken. That's what happens on a hyperwave. When it is broken just once on a weekly closing basis, the line disappears. It means it was never there to begin with. That's different than saying it wasn't providing support like a trend line would provide support. It simply means it was not actually a phase 3 and we are still in phase 2. And from phase 2, we can go up above 20,000, above 30,000, above 50,000. And on that next move up, we will be able to draw a phase 3 line, probably from the top of this point to the next correction. And we don't need to get into that because that's way ahead. We've only got to get through the next 24 plus about 4 hours, and then we can start discussing what the future looks like.
Tyler.
Yep.
Since you were about to show a chart of traditional markets that went through a hyperwave, we did get another great question in the live chat. Can you show a chart where one of the asset or one of the companies went through a full hyperwave and then went above the heights of phase 1 line?
Well, we looked at one before. I think it was City Service, the oil company. No, it was Macy's.
Or we can bring it up on another show. Maybe just talk to it really quickly as
I'll just talk about it. There are very rare examples where after getting a peak like this and then a sharp drop and a recovery of some type, that we've gotten back up to the higher high. But I've never seen an example where it broke above that higher high, ever. What I have seen is this action where you make the assumption you're in a phase 3, but you just don't understand how big the hyperwave is. So when you get a move up like this and a correction, you think that that's a phase 4, 5, 6, and you're coming down to a phase 7. If we break this at phase 3 and we come down here and break this, then this was a 4, 5, 6, and 7. I still don't believe that is true. And I used for an example of that these charts all the way back here in 2013 and 2014, where we had this tremendous surge that came down into what looked like a 5, 6, and 7 before starting up again at higher highs, and a new hyperwave was born for Bitcoin. Bitcoin has done this before, but what was high before was 1,000. After coming up from $50, went up 20x to 1,000, then came all the way back down, and then started this hyperwave. What I believe we are looking at is a smaller part of a much larger hyperwave. But for that to occur, we're going to have to hold either the phase 3 line here or the phase 2 line here, or go all the way back below 1,000 and start a new one again.
Now, Tyler, very simply, if this week closes above, is that a definite confirmation we are in a wave 3?
No, it simply means that we've got a 10th attempt to break it, and it didn't break it. What we will need to do is next week, where we go 150, this line is growing at about 135 points per week. So the 8,096 will increase next week. That will be our hyperwave phase 3 line. And I also pointed out that by early June, this line is going to be over 10,000, which is saying that this price has got to get going to the upside and clear well above these highs and finally clear above 20,000. Then the phase 3 line will still be there, and we'll know that it's valid. We will know that we weren't in a 4, 5, 6, and 7. But the proof can only come when we take out this top. And that's a long ways away. So we're going to take it a week at a time, and we're going to watch what happens. We will definitely do another vlog tomorrow in the morning to see what we have to do for the following 12 hours. And then as we get near the 8 o'clock, we will do one more, and I will make my pronouncement at that point of where we are and what we need to do. But that's where we stand now. It is definitive in terms of the implication if we break down from here. It is not definitive if we are able to hold it one more time, because there's a lot of work to do, as we've talked about, between 10,000 and 12,500. I'm not showing that on this chart because we're worried about going down, not going up at this point. Hopefully in the next several days, we'll start worrying about going up and taking out overhead resistance. So went on longer than I wanted to, but I wanted to be as explicit as I could. I hope everybody is having as great a day as I am, but for some reason I have my doubts. And with that, back to you, Leah.
Sure. And just answering a couple of the very interesting comments and questions very quickly in the live chat, and we can definitely talk another time. One of them was about how Hyperwave should potentially be looking as long-term or not. A quick answer, and then Tyler, if you want to add to it, simply, absolutely, it can help with daily price action given the different resistance lines, and therefore understanding long-term trend lines is really an important way to understand where you are every single day, and ensuring that you're understanding the holistic picture. Secondly, and Tyler, please jump in, and then we swear we'll keep this short and end. Everyone was also talking a little bit about how news can affect traditional markets. We spoke really quickly about this on the last vlog. So again, in traditional markets, it's much more important when the Fed speaks about interest rates, when there's other economic forces at play. Policy can take days, months, years, right? And it absolutely affects the price of fixed income, of equities, of everything. Now in Bitcoin, there's a lot of noise. And so therefore it's really important to filter out the noise versus what's actually news. And since the worlds are just completely different in the Wild West versus what you're looking at on the NASDAQ, et cetera, it really should be seen as almost completely differently. And that's also where it also comes into play when you're looking at fundamental analysis versus technical analysis. And even though here, Tyler, we look at multiple systems and do also keep fundamental analysis in play as well. It just really is, you should be thinking about it very differently. But Tyler, can you comment just really quickly about how these resistance lines that are created based on understanding which waves we're in can help you trade on a daily basis?
Absolutely. But you put it very well, and I agree with everything you just said. If you can walk around with a mental picture of what a hyperwave looks like in your mind, if you're looking at Amazon or Netflix, or if you're looking at Tesla stock or the Dow Jones Industrial Average, which I believe is in a hyperwave, just beginning another enormous one. If you just keep that mental picture so you know where you are in that wave, if you know you've been going flat for years and years and years, and now you're above that, you know that you can be long or own that particular asset. But you must remember that you've only got a 1 in 4 chance that that asset is going to continue into a full hyperwave. Once you get into what is clearly at least a phase 3, it goes up to over 85% probability that you're going to end up going through a phase 4, 5, 6, and 7. What does that mean? That means as long as you're in a 2 and it's going up, you can own it. Don't think about it. Don't use technical or fundamental analysis on it. It's going up, and it will continue to go up. And then if you see it accelerate, now you know your probabilities are that this is going to go much, much higher. So you can go for years in 1, 2, 3, and 4 of a hyperwave and be almost mindless about it. They're that powerful. It's only at these turning points that you have to then start looking at why. What are the headwinds? Why would this be breaking down now when it shouldn't be? Because everything that we've seen says the prices should go much higher. And then you start looking at technicals, not just hyperwave, not just sequential, not just Elliott wave, not just stop and reverse points, not just moving averages, not just MACDs, but all of them, to get a real sense of what the reality of the current situation is. All of that plays into it. But you can go for very long periods of time when you are assured you are in a hyperwave with making very few decisions and having to go through what we've all had to go through for the last 5 weeks, which is this moment-to-moment analysis to make sure we understand what this is doing. So it's a little longer than you wanted, Leah, but I just wanted to make it complete.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, everyone. And again, just an exciting point about hyperwave and what Tyler's noticed when he's been studying and creating and developed the hyperwave theory is that it really shows a major shift in the world. It's revolutionary. Something is happening in the world that's very exciting and changing the world as we know it. Not just some ex machina stuff, but it proves and shows, if anything, that we should be looking around. We should be thinking about what is going on that's creating this abnormal, absolutely incredible price action that is defined by specific movements. And in all these examples that we've shown in the past, throughout the various vlogs, it's because of gold, because of all these different factors, it does 1000% show that there's something revolutionary happening. So with that said, this is definitely a little long. Sorry about that. If you guys have any questions more, keep writing them in. It's very exciting. And we will definitely do one tomorrow, given all the absolute craziness with Bitcoin price action. And we'll see how things close tomorrow. So fingers crossed. Thanks, everybody.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.